Welcome to the latest edition of the Kellen Association's Unplugged podcast, and I am delighted to be joined by Olivier de Matos, Director General of CropLife Europe. Associations sometimes are known for moving slowly, but today we're talking about association transformation. Olivier, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for the invitation.
Okay, fine. So we wanted to speak to you because a big transformation took place at CropLife Europe. And we want you to share with the other association leaders watching and listening to this podcast. How did you get through that?
I usually start my speech, my introduction of CropLife Europe saying that we are a young organization. Because in fact, we were set up in January 2021. Before that, we were known as ECPA, the European Crop Protection Association. And in January 2021, we moved to CropLife Europe, and I joined actually in October 2021. That change is, when you look at it, basically, ECPA was focusing on one solution to protect crops, and it was the chemical solution. CropLife Europe is basically looking at the four main solutions that are given to farmers to protect their crops. We're talking about the chemical one, the biopesticides, the plant biotechnology, and digital and precision agriculture. So this is what I call actually the toolbox for farmers. So that change was made to reflect the reality on the ground, what we have today. So it was an evolution, and it was actually sort of going from an association that is today more modern than it used to be.
And did this reflect changes that were taking place among your members?
Absolutely. It reflects the change that were taking place among members, but also on the ground, as I said. Looking at farmers today, it's not only like sort of the use of one solution that is being made. It's like a wide range of complementary solutions, so that famous toolbox that go all together. And so this is why there was a need for the association to reflect the realities of the businesses and the realities of the farmers.
And to what extent was this a public relations exercise? Because you mentioned chemicals, which are not a popular sector maybe to be defending and promoting. Does it make it easier now that you're looking at the sector more holistically?
Well, pesticides and the chemical side of things, I take your point. There is also an evolution on the chemical side of things. I mean, the profiles have evolved with innovation as well. But coming back to that exercise, yes, I mean, we are basically talking about a more holistic approach to things, and something that enables us to look at the topic of agriculture and crop protection with a wider horizon. And we have a lot of things that are part of that toolbox that is complementary again, that are enabling us to have a more proactive stance when it comes to outreach with partners, with also European institutions, for example.
Yeah, and I guess in all of this, you can look at this from a policy perspective, you can look at it from a business perspective. How did you sort of balance those two types of interests as you were navigating this change?
When you look at it, it's basically trying to find the right balance between the evolution of regulation and also the innovation and the business side of things. So in this case, the idea is to make sure, or at least for us, is to advocate for a regulation or regulatory framework that goes together with the innovation. If you allow me to use a couple of examples here, we have a lot of new things that are being available in the toolbox. Plant biotechnology, for example, new genomic techniques, biopesticides. And these are things for which the regulatory framework is still missing. So we have the innovation. Other continents are using that innovation. In Europe, we're still behind. So that's the idea, is like to find the right calibration between what is needed and what we see in terms of needs on the ground, and also the evolution of the framework.
So are you saying that the barrier to more environmentally friendly approaches is not at the business level, but more at the policy level?
Today, yes. And look at the farm to fork strategy, for example, the Green Deal farm to fork strategy. This is basically a great example of horizontal approach to things. You are looking at the sectors, you are looking at actually what needs to be done, you are looking also at how we can change the way we produce our food, because we need to do it, and we totally embrace it. And when you look at the toolbox, this is basically something that will be helpful, that will use the regulators and the European Union to achieve these objectives.
I was looking at the mission letter to the outgoing Commissioner for Agriculture, and of course sustainability is everywhere. I think farm to fork is one of the first things that's mentioned, and now it's almost like in the current mission letter that competitiveness has replaced sustainability. Does that make things easier for an association like yours?
I actually wouldn't say that it has replaced. I would say that now there is more emphasis on competitiveness, and both can go together. They are not it's not either or. It's like, you can be sustainable and you can be competitive, right? So thanks to Professor Draghi, we have now competitiveness high on the agenda. And I do believe that, with the toolbox, with basically the solutions that are being proposed by CropLife Europe, we can be sustainable and we can be competitive. We can help farmers being competitive.
And are you more welcome? Is it something that's kind of less controversial? Do you feel like you're less representing a controversial sector than perhaps in the past?
Short answer is yes, because we have a wide range of solutions that are helpful, and there is, I think, also people realize that we are part of the solution, and with all the options that we have, with all the investments that are being made, we are actually as an association, we are more into the proactive foot. And a more interaction foot. Also, it's a question of mindset. We are, having a collaborative mindset on our side is important. It helps us basically outreaching, being constructive also. So it's a question. It's several elements that have to be taken into account. But yes, what you said is right. The look has changed.
Do you feel that industry did enough to make their voice heard during the previous mandate?
Well, I've joined CropLife Europe 3 years ago, so it was like sort of towards the end of the previous mandate. I would say that sometimes we're a bit shy. We have to express ourselves a bit more. I was talking about a constructive approach, so we have to be constructive. Maybe sometimes we were a bit shy and we haven't done enough. But there is also I feel sometimes a bit of a reluctance, because when we express a position, when we go out there, you always have like sometimes, not always, sometimes you have a reaction that goes against the sector. So at the end of the day, it's trying to find the right balance between basically going out there, expressing views, but not being too strong. So it's still I would say something that we're trying to learn as we go.
Absolutely, but I don't want to single out CropLife Europe in this, but I think all associations are in the position where it's really important to build the relationships and keep the relationships. I'm just wondering if we prioritize that too much above actually representing the interests and actually sharing the realities that companies were facing.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, we are actually representing the interests. We are trying to do it in a constructive way. And one of the things that I've noticed is that when we express a view, we try to not express the view on our own. If we see other partners, other associations, also other individuals that basically share that position or share an opinion, so we try to also express it collectively.
So you got through this transition. It sounds like it was done pretty efficiently. What was the hardest part of introducing these changes?
Well, I think that the hardest part was like putting everything together, and that was my predecessor that did that, and this was a tough one. Now we are getting into the core side of things in terms of the positioning, basically, in terms of also delivering on what we are promising, so to speak. It's a combination of several things. I would say that the first one is what I mentioned, like the being constructive, having a collaborative tone, collaborative mindset, and having a constructive tone, that is important. So interacting, being open to the conversation, that is going to be also important. And for the association itself is also like walking the talk. There are a lot of things that we put in place. We have, we've adopted at the same time the 2030 commitments. That is a series of commitments that include investment, heavy investment on innovation, for example. We also have like several projects. So we are putting everything in place to do our part of the job, and trying to make sure that our partners, European institutions, understand that, and that we create a framework that pushes innovation.
So there wasn't big challenges in terms of aligning members on this new direction?
Not necessarily, because most of them actually were already operating with the full solutions, or they were it was part of their strategy there. So that's why it was, we say transformation. I would rather say evolution.
So it was really getting up to date with the reality of your members.
Okay. Absolutely.
Okay, very good. Usually when you talk to people at associations, they like to talk about regulatory continuity and the same regulations being applied in the same way across the whole of the EU. But I guess sometimes there are products that will make sense more in certain countries compared to others, and certain regulatory regimes that will make sense more compared to other countries. Is one size fits all always the best approach?
No. I think regulation has to follow innovation, has to be aware actually, and I wouldn't even say follow, it has to prepare for innovation. So we need a regulatory framework that fosters that innovation. We shouldn't be scared. And my personal opinion here is that sometimes when we look at innovation, we look at it with an eye that is like, how can we regulate it, frame it, and so on. We actually should look at innovation as, okay, so what is innovation bringing to us? What are the potential downsides, and how can we address the best way these downsides? I'm not saying that it's not the case, but we still have today some regulations that are still behind and that are not adapted to the realities. And unfortunately in Europe, we still take a lot of time in discussions. So sometimes we are just want to go for the perfect, and we should go for the good. So that's also a mindset that we need to change in Europe.
So looking for more of a performance-based or a reality-based regulation as opposed to a prescriptive approach, which is...
Yes, in particular in our sector. I mean, we need to look at outcome-based legislation. That's the fundamental point. What do we want to achieve? What do we want to basically give the farmers so that the farmers can do their job? So, what are the tools that I want to give to them? And then look at the array of, options that we have, and make sure that we have something that is inclusive and that is, as useful as possible for the farmer.
One way of looking at competitiveness, and I admit that there are lots of different ways of defining it, but one way is about getting costs down. And for instance, if grain is cheaper from the Ukraine, then we should use that grain at the expense of perhaps EU farmers. Is that your vision of competitiveness?
Not necessarily. I think I'm not the commissioner and I'm not the commission, and they are the ones setting the tone, right? So, today we are at the crossroads. We're going to need a strong vision for Europe, in particular for agriculture. Competitiveness is basically a question of making sure that we have the right vision, the right innovation, the right support. So it's not necessarily a question of price. I think we need to look at it from a a broader perspective rather than trying to pinpoint things. And this is where the vision is important. So if we ask ourselves, where do we want to take European agriculture in the next 5 to 10 years, right? And then we get a clear idea of what we want to do. Then what are the tools that actually will help us getting there? And what is the framework that is required for these tools to be implemented and for us to get to that objective?
How important then is the topic of food security, and is that something that you get into when it comes to representing your members?
Absolutely. I mean, for us, it's a very important topic. Again, I was saying, looking at it from a broader perspective. Here we are looking at several parts of the puzzle. So food security is extremely important, and it's not only about availability of the food; it's also about the cost of it.
So you've completed the transformation. We're entering into a new mandate. The atmosphere is a bit more favorable. It sounds like a good position to be in.
Let's see.
Okay.
Let's see.
Olivier, it's been a pleasure talking to you today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Olivier. Thank you for the invitation.
And welcome to the latest edition of the Kellen Association's Unplugged series. And today I am delighted to be joined by Nele, Devolder, and we are talking about strategic insights when it comes to association management. Nele Devolder, you are a vice president of Kellen. I'd like to start by asking you, you're managing lots of associations. What are some of the things that you need to bear in mind when you're helping associations try to think about strategy and how to run their association from a strategic point of view?
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, well, actually, I think first of all, what is important is that what we always try to do is we help associations, we support them in remaining relevant. Specifically nowadays, I think it's important for associations to showcase to not only their members, but also the outside world, stakeholders, authorities, like why they are there, what is their value proposition, why they need to be consulted whenever needed. And I think that is what strategic advice can bring to them, like to make sure that we align priorities, we make sure that policy and business objectives are aligned and that both have an equal role, so to say, in the organization.
Are there question marks about the relevance of association which are perhaps more important or more front of mind for people than they were, say, in the past?
I don't think there's question marks in the relevance. I think they probably, I would say, more focused. So I think the purpose of an association will be more defined, I would say, than it used to be. I mean, a couple of years ago when there was like an association, as we mentioned, like a club. Nowadays, it's really like they have very clear objectives in terms of policy, in terms of added value, and in terms of policy objectives and business objectives.
What I often find at associations is because you have a lot of different member interests, often they can have a lot of priorities, which makes it difficult for them to focus and to do a certain number of things very well and really to have a competitive advantage. How do you try to address that?
Well, I think that is probably for the majority of the associations is one of the bigger challenges. I mean, the membership, it can be very diverse. You have like SMEs, you have big corporations, you can have national associations with all there's always like a certain link, but there will be different priorities, there will be different focus areas. For me, the main solution to that is really a strategy. It's a really clear strategy, which is flexible enough to change whenever there's a shift in the regulatory landscape, but is still, strong enough to have everybody on board within your diverse membership.
Now, does the strategy often boil down to the member and the type of value for money that the member is getting from the association?
Well, I think in any case, you need to look at the priorities of your members, of the value proposition, and that is part of, the strategic setting of your association's objectives. So obviously it all starts with the member priorities, but it comes within a bigger picture, and that is, I think, the opportunity, the responsibility of the strategic leader of the association to make sure that that is all aligned.
Right. Do you think that associations should be run like businesses, or do they need a different type of approach?
No, I mean, that is exactly what I think, and I mentioned it before already to you as well. I think that nowadays an association needs to be run like a business or almost run like a business because of resources. You sit around the table when you have a board meeting with people that come from corporations. So it is their time, it is the investment that they put in the association. And we feel more and more that people really want to see what do we get out of it? What is really the business value? Even also when you look at policy priorities, I mean, it's sometimes for certain clients very important to showcase what is going to be or what potentially can the impact be on their business in a very, very tangible way.
This is hard, right, for associations, especially when it comes to trying to measure the impact of policy.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the more challenging tasks that an association or an association leader can have, to bring that. And I think what can help, is really to do some data collection, case studies, like really if you can make it very concrete, very clear, because sometimes you also need to educate them. If you have an association that haven't done regulatory affairs or like even monitoring before, sometimes you just need to come to the table and say, listen, guys, this is what might come your way, and this is what the potential effect can be on your business. And then, then they're gonna listen a little bit harder. I have the impression, from my experience.
When we're looking at things from a sort of business point of view, people always or often try to look at things from a sort of competitor point of view. Who are my competitors? Who else is trying to target the audience that I'm targeting? Does that make sense in the association world? Is that the right way to think about it as well?
I definitely think that is out there. But on the other hand, I think one of the strengths of an association is looking for your ally associations or your partners. If you have good stakeholder relations and you maintain these relationships, you can just do much more together than you would do by yourself with, the same resources. It's just easier, I feel, that when you have a shared vision or you have shared objectives, that you just strengthen your forces, because the message that you need to get out there is just going to be easier to get across.
there are lots of new industries developing. AI is creating a lot of innovation, new types of companies and so on. Let's say a new sector develops and a group of companies come together, they want to start an association. What advice do you give them? Where should they start?
Well, what we usually do, I mean, because that's something that happens every now and then, obviously. So we get the people around the table. So it's like the founding members, and we make sure we have very clear views on what is exactly, your needs, what you want to get out of this, and what's the purpose of this association. And based on that, we basically organize strategic sessions. We have interviews. We share, whatever they want to share of information, what we can use to develop that strategy, to develop the raison d'être, so to say, of the association. That's probably the first thing, because if that's not clear, I don't think we need to go any further, to be honest. And then the next step would be the strategy, objectives, obviously the usual, the vision, the mission, and so on. So, but I think it's very important that you have everybody on board, even if there's not a board yet. Yeah. They need to be like on board and make sure that, the expectations are set right and that they know where we're going and that they're all looking the same direction.
Okay, very good. Revenue diversification. I've heard you speak about this before. Is this taking things too far? Can't we just be happy just with events and membership fees? Is that enough? Do we need to think more beyond that?
I definitely think we need to think beyond that. I mean, I think revenue diversification for associations now, probably not only for, associations. I mean, this is also something that comes from corporate. You can just not put all your eggs in one basket. One basket. I mean, it's just a little bit too much of a risk. Like before, okay, membership, fine, fair enough. But I mean, the more, diversity you have, the better you also can you can develop more, you can just spend it more, you can give more back, you can give back more to your members. So I think for me, it's key. I mean, honestly, revenue diversification, it's true. Events, fair enough. You can get your money from that, or maybe better, you could get it because times have changed. I mean, we've all seen like a couple of years ago when COVID hits. Well, I think if you as an association only were depending on your events at that time, it was really, really hard time, So, no, I think it really brings a lot of opportunities. It also brings a lot of reflection, like within the organization. And that links back to strategy again, because I do feel that every, I would say 2 to 3 years, you just need to come back and say, are we still good? If it's with, your sources of revenue, if it's with your strategy, your mission, your value proposition, but just to reflect. And I think nowadays that's really what associations need to do.
But don't you find that members, even if they're from a business background, once they get into the association, once they're on the board, they're very reluctant to talk about money or looking for opportunities to make more money?
Yeah, obviously, but that's why I think a good association leader comes up with that, They don't need to come up with it, or they don't need to come. They just need to be inspired. I mean, and that's then I would say the task of us as an association leader to come up with these ideas and to come up with these kind of suggestions. Like maybe we can look into that. And that's probably, that is not exactly a need you might feel now, but it might come, in like a year and 2 years. And then we've anticipated to it and we're ready. And that's, again, future-proof, Yeah.
So I know, because you've told me already, that becoming an association manager, a leader of this cluster of association management at Kellen, this wasn't the plan. When you started out in your career, this isn't what you kind of saw in the future.
No, actually, no, it was not the plan. I mean, because it's very specific as well. I'm not sure if there's a lot of people who, come out of school and say, like, this is what I want to do. I just kind of rolled into it. And I think it's a very stimulating, if you need to be very dedicated. You need to be very committed and engaged. But I think once you have that, I wouldn't call it love for associations, but I mean, a certain passion for it, it's very, it drives you. And it is something that you learn. I mean, there's so many associations, specifically when you work for like Kellen, we manage so many associations. You go through different associations, different industries, and you take away something from each of it. And then you feel at a certain moment in your career that, okay, actually I get to say something about this. I have created some knowledge. And that is really nice because it never stops, because we operate in a very challenging environment, in a changing environment. And I think that is for me personally what it keeps, what makes it interesting and what, keeps my interest.
So what are the key characteristics or skills that you need to develop to be a good association manager?
I think communication is obviously, important. I also think transparency and directness. I mean, nowadays as well, I feel that it's really, maybe it's easier to say now when you already have like, a couple of years in the business than when you start. But really, I have noticed that the more transparent, the more honest and the more blunt you are, even if it's not always like good news, people are are very appreciative of it, and you kind of get to a level where you're like peer-to-peer with your members. That is very important. And I also do think that strategic thinking, like forward thinking, having that eagerness to learn still as well, because in any industry you need to be kind of aware like what might be coming in the future to be able to bring that solution to your members is important. Yeah, I think leadership in general, also probably, and to a certain extent, you need to trust in yourself that, you can do that.
Strategic skills, communication skills, and don't be afraid to tell it like it is. Don't beat around the bush. Don't be afraid to be blunt. Nele Devolder, thanks for joining us today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.